It's The Real News. I'm Aaron Mate, continuing our conversation with Norman Finkelstein, author of the new book, Gaza, an Inquest into Its Martyrdom. Let's get into this is a tough issue for many people, but you take it on, which is the morality of Hamas and all the other Palestinian factions of armed struggle. Now, you write in the book that under international law, Hamas has every right, Hamas and all Palestinian factions, because by the way, it's not just Hamas that uses force inside Gaza. There are several factions there. But you write that under international law, they have every right to armed resistance. Can you explain that?
Well, I was pretty careful in my choice of words because I went through the scholarly literature on the subject, and the most authoritative opinions by, say, James Crawford at Oxford is that there's no law prohibiting peoples under occupation and struggling for self-determination. There's no law barring them from using armed force to gain their self-determination or to end an occupation. On the other hand, international law is very clear and unequivocal that an occupying power or a power denying a people the right to self-determination does not have the right to use armed force. Now, that raises the next level of analysis is two complications. Complication number one on the side of Hamas is, even if they have the right to use armed force, or there's no law prohibiting them, do they have the right to use weapons which are inherently indiscriminate and therefore cannot target military sites or military personnel, but will end up causing significant civilian death? So there's a question that's a secondary level of analysis. They have the right, but do they have the right to use indiscriminate weapons? On the Israeli side, they don't have the right to preserve an occupation. They don't have the right to deny a people the right to self-determination, but do they have the right to use their weapons in self-defense? That's their claim, okay? So, if you allow me, let's look at each of those questions. Question number one, Hamas's use of indiscriminate weapons. First of all, as a factual matter, let's set aside the quality of the weapons. The weapons are basically symbolic. They're the equivalent of fireworks. As Khalid Michel put it at one point, the head of Hamas at that moment, he no longer is, he says they're our cry to the world. You know, it's a kind of, if I can use my language, it's a kind of SOS. They're sending these flares into the air. SOS, we're dying. SOS, we're dying. That's not an exaggeration. When Mary Robinson from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, when she went to Gaza in 2008, she said, a whole civilization is being destroyed. I am not exaggerating. A whole civilization is being destroyed.
Okay.
So if you send up flares saying SOS, we're dying, which have next to zero impact on civilians, next to zero, I think whether or not they're discriminate or indiscriminate, it's beside the point. They're doing no damage. They are almost entirely symbolic.
Okay, but here's my problem with that. To say that they're entirely symbolic and
almost entirely
symbolic, and that's their SOS, presumes that that's their only method of letting out an SOS. And firing rockets, even if they're futile, is not the only way. I mean, you've pointed this out. that they could engage if they wanted. They could organize a mass nonviolent campaign. But you write in the book this. You say the ultimate question is, do Palestinians have the right to symbolically resist slow death, punctuated by periodic massacres, or is it incumbent upon them to lie down and die? But why are those the only two options? I mean, why is an option, instead of exercising their symbolic right to resist, why is not, instead of directing your energies towards that, towards violence, in the case of Hamas, directing it towards organizing mass nonviolence? How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I'm not a moral coward. And as I said at the beginning of the book, I've never taken foundation money, not that it was ever offered me, but I don't take the foundation money. And that's a kind of, or think tank money, or even university money. So it's a kind of a liberatory experience. If he who pays the piper calls the tune, nobody's paying this piper, so I get to call my own tune. And so I just want to look at the facts. Nobody has the right to tell Palestinians that they should practice nonviolence. I think it's a losing strategy, the strategy of armed resistance. And I've said it many times to them. Occasionally I do seminars over Skype with people in Gaza. And I'm very forthright about that. I said, it's just a mythology. There's no armed resistance. It's just something Israel exploits each time it launches one of its massacres. But there's a difference between telling them, I don't think this strategy is going to work, and telling them they don't have the right. The law is clear.
I got that. I'm not
they
saying
have the right.
I got that.
I'm not going to tell them they have to practice nonviolence. Gandhi did not do that. During the first Arab rebellion in Palestine in 1936 to 38, he had a very heated exchange, you might say an unfriendly exchange, with Martin Buber, the so-called pacifist Zionist philosopher. And he said to Buber, well, I think it began with an interview that Gandhi gave. He said, I wish the Palestinians choose nonviolence. But then he went on to say, according to the accepted canons, C-A-N-O-N-S, according to the accepted canons of right and wrong, he didn't say Palestinians, at that point, Arabs have the right to use armed force to resist their aggressors, their occupation. So I am dealing here in the book with the law. And under the law, they have no obligation to lie down and die. They have no obligation to do that under the law. They have the right to resist, and they have the right to use force in their resistance. Now, you know, Gandhi advocated for the Jews during World War II, during the height of the Nazi Holocaust. He said they should have gone non-violently. He says that. I have mixed feelings about what he says there, but now is not the time to get into that. He's been very violently attacked for what he said about the Jews should have gone quietly to their death. The point I'm making is, but does anybody tell the people in Warsaw not to have engaged in an uprising?
Well, the difference there, though, is that it wouldn't have mattered what the Jews in World War II did anyway. They would have been forced to the ovens no matter what.
Yeah, but nobody denies them the right.
Of course not. Listen, that's not the point. That's not the point.
It is the point to me.
The point of contention here is that the only Hamas's two choices are not lie down and die.
It's politically inexpedient what they're doing.
Yeah.
I have no doubt about that.
And they're still responsible for the consequences of
no, they're not responsible
of their decisions. Yes,
right.
They are.
They are politically responsible. They're not legally responsible, and they're not morally responsible. They have the right. They have that right, and they reserve that. And not my opinion, the law is they have the right. Now there is the question, as I said, the weapons are indiscriminate. that's technically it's illegal under international law. In my opinion, as I said, their effectiveness is almost entirely symbolic. Number two, there's a second aspect. And here is the only place in the book where I do disagree with international law. Well, there are, one place. There's another place where I have a partial reservation. And the problem is this, and I'm sure you'll understand it, it's perfectly obvious. What does it mean to say a weapon is indiscriminate? What does that mean? A weapon can't be objectively indiscriminate. It can only be relatively indiscriminate. As compared to another weapon, this weapon is indiscriminate. But in and of itself, a weapon can't be indiscriminate, because a weapon in 1940, which would have been described as discriminate, in 2010, it's described as indiscriminate. Okay. Why? Because technology has improved, and what seemed to be discriminate 50 years ago now seems indiscriminate, because we have what's called precision weapons.
Right. So and your point here is that if Hamas wasn't occupied, they would be in a position to access precision weapons. But unfortunately, because of their position,
or if they weren't poor,
right?
It discriminates against poor. These laws discriminate against poorly endowed fighters, and richly endowed fighters get to conduct wars. So then, where does that leave us? It leaves us in a kind of ridiculous argument, or a ridiculous conclusion. It really is a case of a reductio ad absurdum. So you have the human rights organizations, for example, the UN Human Rights Council. What do they say to Hamas? Well, they say, Hamas, you can't fight in densely populated areas, which is not the law, incidentally, but let's leave that aside. So you should go to non-densely populated areas, basically vacant areas of Gaza. There are a couple, a few vacant areas. Now, go to the vacant areas, but you can't use any of your weapons, because your mortars are indiscriminate and your so-called rockets are indiscriminate. So you can't use any of your weapons. Now you have a problem. As John Dugard, the leading authority in international law on the Israel-Palestine conflict,
jurist from South Africa.
Yeah, South Africa. Yeah. He's called the father of human rights in South Africa, an extremely principled, a very special human being, but that's another story. John Dugard says we have an unusual situation here. We have an occupation that's externally maintained. Mm-hmm. Israel occupies by virtue of the fact that it controls the airspace, the sea space, the borders. So, but it's all external. It's by remote control. So, you have to go to vacant spaces, says UN Human Rights Council. You can't use those rockets. You can't use the mortars, because they're indiscriminate weapons, and we can only use precision weapons. And then, how do you fight an external occupation? You can't do it. So in effect, you're saying Palestinians don't have any right to armed self-defense. Then just be honest about it. Say you don't have that right, because you're not rich enough to afford precision weapons. You don't have that right. The only thing that wasn't recommended to them, Palestinian, it's not just Hamas, it's the whole population. The only thing that's not recommended to them is they should line up like ducks to be shot down by Israeli planes and rockets. That to me is a reductio ad absurdum.
I get it. You're pointing to the hypocrisy and the. It's totally hypocritical, and it's a flagrant double standard. Mm-hmm. There's no argument there. I guess the point of contention here is, again, even though Hamas is representing an occupied people, mm-hmm. and occupied people have every legal right to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm. Armed force to defend themselves.
To use armed force. My concern is conflating legal rights with morality, and morality includes being responsible for the consequences of your actions. So if you know, even if you have every right to launch rockets or to authorize the launching of rockets or to allow it to happen, if you know it's going to provoke a response, I guess even though we're sitting here in the West, we don't live under occupation, do we have the right to say to criticize Hamas?
But Aaron, you're really mixing cause and effect. You say it's going to provoke a response. They were provoked into responding.
But
It's Israel that breaks the ceasefires. They were provoked into responding. Right. And then what are they supposed to do?
They don't have to fire rockets. They don't.
They don't have to. And you know what? I wish they didn't. I do, because I do believe it plays into Israel's hands. However, I will never criticize them for it. And you know why? Yes. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the people support it. And I'm not going to tell those people, if the people were to condemn Hamas, and right now there does seem to be a strong sentiment, they want to avoid at any cost another Israeli attack. So if Hamas were to attack now, in violation of the will of the people of Gaza, I would oppose it.
You're confident that a majority of Gazans support Hamas's and the other factions' decision?
When Israel is attacking them, yes, they do. There's no question about that. Exactly as what happened in Lebanon when Israel attacked in 2006. Even Lebanon is a very divided country. But when the attack occurred, all the polls showed 70-80% of the people of Lebanon supported their country when it was coming under a foreign invasion by these marauders, these vandals, this Mongol army. Of course they supported them, and it was the same thing in Gaza. At the end, I'm going to be faithful to the facts because I don't fear the facts. My credo in life is I never quarrel with facts. By the end, yes, the people were broken. Their spirits were broken, and now they dread the prospect of another attack. And Hamas is very careful. Hamas is effectively not playing the role of the Palestinian Authority. Right. It's policing Gaza to make sure there are no attacks from inside Gaza, because they know another attack, first of all, it's a disaster for them, but the people don't want it. But so long as the people want it, I support it 100%. They have the right to resist that Mongol army.
No challenging the right, but again, the question is...
It's not politically expedient. It's not politically prudent. I have no doubt about that. But I will never tell a person in Gaza, you don't have the right.
Fair enough.
I won't ever tell them that.
If the people of Gaza...
When I hear you tell Jews they don't have the right to use, maybe for all I know, the Warsaw Ghetto, they were using indiscriminate weapons. Who the hell knows and who the hell cares?
They would have every right too. The question is only, again, I have to repeat myself. Mm-hmm. If Palestinians had been given a choice back in 2014, hey, do you want us to fire rockets back, or should we try to organize under these horrible conditions some sort of mass civil resistance?
I wish they did. It wasn't at that point in time an option.
Okay.
It's not so easy.
Is it even a moral
It's not so easy to do those things.
Exactly. So
and the people don't believe in it. I talk to them all the time about it.
Yeah.
Every time. And they don't want to hear from me. Whenever I talk about international law, even though, we're separated by thousands of miles, I could see the eyes rolling.
Right.
This guy's talking to me about international law. We've had a blockade here for 12 years. Nothing gets in, nothing goes out. He's talking to me about international law. How about if he had to give his children water that's poisoned? As Sarah Roy wrote, the children of Gaza are being poisoned every day. 95% of the drinking water in Gaza is unfit for human consumption. Is that international law? He's lecturing me about international law? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going there. I'm going to be lecturing them about the law. I try, to be honest, I do. But I can understand, it's not just skepticism, it's disgust. It's disgust.
So as Westerners, it's not our place to even ask the question that I raised, whether or not...
it's our place to tell them.
Right, not our place to tell them, but do we even have the right? Is it even moral to ask the question, given the fact that we're not living under occupation?
I tell them all the time. I mean, I say it all the time. I don't give orders, but I say it's not working. It's a myth. And I'm with Amilcar Cabral. He was the head of the liberation movement in the tiny little place which nobody ever heard of anymore called Guinea-Bissau. And he once gave a speech, and the speech came to be titled, "Tell No Lies, Claim No Easy Victories." And I'm not going to tell lies. There are no rockets. Hamas churns out all of these videos of people with rockets. Everybody believes it. It's all theater.
We'll leave it there. Join us in the next part. The book is Gaza, an Inquest into Its Martyrdom. The author is Norman Finkelstein.